A certain person.
It's not like it's the pears and peas.
Hello, we're going to go ahead and get this started. Welcome to the second reading of the Fall 2014 Visiting Writers Series. And I'd like to introduce Greg Kosmicki. He is a poet and social worker living in Omaha, Nebraska. He founded the Backwaters Press in 1997, which he edits and publishes. His poetry has been published in numerous magazines since 1975, both print and online, including Briarcliff Review, Connecticut Review, Cortland Review, New Letters, Nimrod, Paris Review, Poetry East, Rattle, Smoking Poet, Paddlefish, and Windless Orchard. He received artist fellowships for his poetry from the Nebraska Arts Council, 2000 and 2006. He is the author of 4 books and 8 chapbooks of poems. 2 of the poems from his book, From WordPress, Some Hero of the Past, and 1 poem from the newest chapbook from Pudding House Publications, New Route in the Dream, have been selected by Garrison Keillor and read by him on the Writer's Almanac. His new book, Sheep Can Recognize Individual Human Faces, was published in June 2014 by Stephen F. Austin University Press. He and Debbie, his wife of 40 years, are the parents of 3 children and grandparents of 1. Please help me welcome Greg Kosmicki.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I know you could be out drinking beer, so which is where I would be if I were your age, except for you, Neil. I'm going to read some poems. I tried to select them just by the kind of categories of poems, like neighborhood poems or based on driving or one about my wife, but my poems are all sort of about the same thing, me, so they really don't have any categories. But the first 3 I'd like to read are poems that occurred around the neighborhood or based upon daily occurrences or something along those lines. And the first one is entitled The Moon, the Atlanta Falcons, and Silage Pits. When I read this poem in Omaha, I have to explain what silage pits are. Does anybody here not know what a silage pit is? So that's when I was a kid. We used to go drink beer in silage pits so we wouldn't get caught by the cops. The Moon, the Atlanta Falcons, and Silage Pits. We're sitting in the TV room. It's a Sunday night. The Packers and the Falcons are on TV, and Debbie says, "Look at the moon." Sure enough, out the window, up in the eastern sky, riding high in its moonness, like some drunk patriarchal royalty, above all the suffering and the death, in a few faint clouds that we have left here on our earth, a part of our environment we haven't yet destroyed, the rain, the clouds, the air. It was up there, the moon. We looked out the window of our house. While in Atlanta, Georgia, the Falcons were kicking the shit out of the Packers, and I was eating a sandwich made out of wheat bread baked in an oven by people I don't know, eating a salmon patty from salmon caught by fishermen I will never meet, and there was the moon. I tell you, the moon is round and as silvery white as it was when I was a young man, drunk in a silage pit somewhere with a bunch of my high school buddies. And even then there was the moon. Even then I knew I would live forever. You don't have to clap after each poem. You don't want to, because then if I read one it's really a clunker and you don't feel like clapping, it's terrible. So First day back from vacation after work, mowing the lawn that got really tall while we were gone for 13 days on an extra week before that. That was a puff title. It was originally like the first 10 lines of this poem, and I couldn't think of a title, so I just changed it into the title. I've done about half the parking, what some people call it, the strip between the sidewalk and the street, when I see a bright red spot in the grass. I think first it's a broken up piece of plastic, all rough edges and dark on the flip side, when I realize it's a cardinal. I've never seen one dead before. It must have flown in front of a car. It's been here a while. One of the most beautiful creatures that lives in this part of the country. I can smell its rotting flesh, its couple of ounces of muscles that moved the red wings and powered the ruby throat, cocked his red crested head, makes the smell all out of proportion. So this is the death of beauty. It smells the same as any death. I keep mowing back and forth by death. I run over death on purpose to try and get it to go back into the earth sooner. I know that under the scarlet feathers, it's seething with maggots. Here's praise for the maggots, for erasing death from our midst. A week from now, there will be no death of the cardinal for me to look at. No death of a cardinal for me to smell. There will be the beauty of the cardinal. There will be the beauty of death. I will hear a cardinal up in a tree singing, but it will not be singing anything about death. At least that's how I want to interpret its song. It's a song about being a cardinal. And the last kind of neighborhood grouping I'd like to read is a poem called Evening Walk. This is about an old guy who used to live down the street from me, and he always said, when you met him, he'd always say, hi, like Randy in American Idol, you know. So he's the only person I ever heard say that all the time. Evening Walk. Early winter, air cold and clear. I walk my usual route down 52nd. Too dark to see much, but I saw a box of Swiss Miss in Mr. Ralph's recycle bin. No beer cans. He's an old guy going blind. He always looks out somewhere far away when I talk to him, then turns toward the sound of my voice. He's one of those guys who replies, aye, aye, when you greet him, even if you say, hello, Mr. Ralph, instead of, how you doing? When I walk by his duplex, sometimes he's taking out the trash. Sometimes he's coming back from a walk, carrying a heavy wooden pole, what they called a punji stake in riot training in the Navy. I can't imagine him using it on anyone. Then again, I can. Sometimes I come up behind him when he's heading out for his walk. He doesn't remember my name, but he knows my voice. I don't think he could tell what I look like, but he always knows me. Days when I go by, when I don't see him, I start to worry. I guess worry's not good for much. I think he'd say that if I told him. It's like something he'd say. I say, hey, Mr. Ralph. He says, aye, aye. He turns to my voice, gives me his great, meaty hand. Now, were you clapping up the other ones or not? I'll have to put a check mark by that one. Two poems I've got here. A lot of my poems, and maybe like all Americans, we spend a lot of time in our cars, and so poems naturally start generating in the cars, and other things got generated in cars too in the past. I don't know. Anyway, so these two poems both start out in cars, although one's a dream sequence. This one's actually kind of a recapitulation of what actually I was thinking about at one time. driving down the highway this afternoon on my job. For some reason, a sense of happiness and well-being came over me, like I was taking some antidepressants and they just kicked in after 3 or 4 months waiting. I didn't know what to do with the feeling. After all, I'm used to thinking about death. Read the obits in the local news first thing on my job each day to see if any of my clients bit the dust. Then I go out and visit these fragile old ladies and angry old men. Lots of them look like skeletons with skin draped over the bones, but they're hanging on. Even so, that's what I see and think about each day. Many of them slapped silly by some disease, shocked as cattle in the chute, but hanging on. So I'm driving out to see this tiny old woman who sits in a chair all day to sleep at the dining room table, and this other one addicted to her pain medications I haven't met before. And the sun is up and in my face like the fact of life and the fact of death and the fact of the slow decline out of life most of us take. Most of us aren't lucky enough to get hit by lightning or a meteorite. Most of us are going to go through that slow slippage from the peak of our powers, like a guy trapped on a gravel cliff, grasping at pebbles and grass tufts. And I'm thinking about this kind of stuff driving, suddenly happy, suddenly healthy and well, as if I were 15 again, when I knew I would never die. Or if I did die, it would be a hero's death, and there would be music playing, and somehow the story of me would live on somewhere. I wasn't exactly sure where, but somewhere. And now I'm telling myself, God damn, I feel good driving down this highway. God damn. This other driving poem is a dream sequence. My older brother was killed when I was 16, and he was in a car accident, and that was 45 years ago at the writing of this poem, probably 46 years ago now. So he keeps wandering in and out of poems and of my dream world and so on. So this is a poem about that. Driving the U-Haul. My brother arrived last week in a dream and subtly betrayed me. Let me take charge and stood by while I ran a truck down an icy hill toward a kid in a wheelchair. I had a truck loaded with his stuff I had to take somewhere while he stood by at our old school. I saw him there, though he was pale, not much of a figure, but him, I knew it. So I realized what this meant was that it was time for me to take up all the burden of the past and the present and the future, all the burdens, and carry them. It's not up to him anymore to carry anything. He was releasing them to me. That's why I was able to start the truck, why I had the truck full of stuff. It was all of him, our lives, all the detritus, all the good and the bad, disguised as boxes of stuff. 45 records, Sam Cooke, Elvis, Venetian blinds, our shotguns, his clothes, white socks, windbreaker, a couple record players, his red suede shoes, junk out of an apartment he lived in when he died. I had it in that U-Haul truck. I drove toward the kids at the bottom of the icy hill, who put the kid in the wheelchair in my way to play chicken. And by God, I won. I turned the truck onto a lawn, and I was pissed at my brother, who has been dead now 45 years, pissed off at him. But then I knew this dream was his gift to me. He was saying, goodbye, Greg. Your life is your own. My life is yours too. What little you can remember of it. You can have it and take it on that truck. You can steer it for the front lawn, into the snow. You pass the test. My past is your junk and your driving. Thank you. Much to my shame, although I've been writing poems for years and years, I don't. My wife is always kind of in the background of the poems, but you know, I'll mention Debbie said such and such in a poem or something, but write very few of them that are kind of directly about her. And this is one that's got her as the main character. It's entitled "Another Freaking Epiphany at the Drugstore." Do you ever know what an epiphany is? In case you don't, that's when you have a big revelation of something suddenly appears to you. Another freaking epiphany at the drugstore. Debbie was over in another aisle at Walgreens, where we live out the part of our life called dependent on the system that enslaves you. Seems we spend more and more time here lately. When I realize what a selfish prick I am, having written only about 5 poems for her in 40 years of writing poems, even though she's over in the cold remedies right now, seeking another cure for me. She's always trying to fix me, but so far it hasn't worked. I'm going to read a couple poems that were, one is based upon a job I had when we first moved to Omaha, and another one is based upon a memory that I had from having walked out into a rainstorm in the fall some years ago at my job at lunch break. And then I had a memory of when I was in the Navy back in the 60s, 70s. The days are shorter now. It's the beginning of fall. How we struggle through these days without appreciation. Though I did walk out in the rain and felt the cold wind against my face, the wind blowing my hair. All day at my job, I was stuck in my boss's office, staffing cases. We could have staffed them in a quarter of the time, but he is a lonely man whose life has no meaning for him, and he wanted to keep me in there. At lunch, though, I got to go outside into the wind and the spitting rain. I often think of walking along the shore of Lake Michigan at the Great Lakes Naval Hospital when I was a young man. It was winter. The wind was blowing across the lake. And across the world, guys my age were getting their legs and arms blown off in Vietnam. I was stateside, dropping acid weekends, walking out here by the lake sometimes, getting all the girls for the first time in my life, and coming out to walk by the lake with the wind. Because I didn't understand what it meant to be alive. But I was alive, nor to have friends, people who took me for what I was, or what they thought I was for the first time in my life, who did not know me from when I was a child, for whom I could be anyone or anything. They put their trust and faith in me, and we were friends. I had never experienced that before in my life. To have someone listen to what I said and to believe it. To have my actions and my words unfiltered by the fact of anything anyone knew of me from my childhood, because no one did. And in the wind it was, on the shores of Lake Michigan, with a girl whose name I can recall but would never say, because she's most likely someone's grandmother. We walked, and I turned my head to see the dark line of trees, and I turned my head to see the frozen wind off the lake, the wild wind lashing my face, the wild wind lashing hers. And this poem is entitled Counting Swipes. It recounts about a guy who was one of my residents in a group home where my wife and I lived. He was developmentally delayed, and he was very obsessive compulsive. And one thing I learned from working with developmentally delayed people, and we had to teach a lot of routines in the morning and in the evening to, get up and get things done so you could get on the van and get out of the house. And I learned actually from working this job how routinized everyone is, and even now if I get out of the usual order of doing something in the morning, I'll go to work and forget to brush my teeth or something like that. And that is something I actually learned from working with developmentally delayed people. And I mentioned in here, in case people have never seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, there was an anti-hero played by Jack Nicholson in that movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's an incredible movie. And it was written by the American author Ken Kesey, who was far widely known, I think, probably as the head of the Merry Pranksters, which was a group of guys who went around, hippies, and went around and spread the joy and love of dropping LSD. And they rode around on a painted bus throughout the 60s or 70s. And anyway, Randall McMurphy was the main character of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, who was an anti-hero who was stuck into an insane asylum or mental hospital for basically political reasons, as I recall, and he wasn't mentally ill, but he fought the system the whole time. So, counting swipes to the memory of M.O. One thing we worked on was his deodorant. When we took over the group home, he would stand at the sink in the morning and use hundreds of strokes. So we told him, Charlie, not his real name, Charlie, what we want you to do is count to 12. We established a new obsession to get rid of the old one, and it worked. He was a guy who'd get angry over who knows what. I think he was bucking the system, a kind of low-functioning Randall McMurphy. He'd start a rave about just anything, and then he'd spew out his litany. I hope you get killed in a car wreck. I hope you get run over by a semi. And I'm not coming to your funeral, Greg. I'm guessing some other group home staff he'd had when he was a kid got killed, and that was his way of, what, grieving? Getting rid of what guilt he felt? His favorite litany was kind of poetic in a way. Cocksucker, motherfucker, two-ball bitch, pussyhole, suck my dick. He'd bust out with that one over anything, throw himself down on the floor, and I'd try to pick him up. It was just like I'd pinioned Jesus there in the hallway one time when he was refusing to go to the workshop. I had him up off the floor, both arms stretched out, like taking him down from the cross. And he'd go limp again, that classic protester move you'd see at any military base in the Vietnam days. He fought the system right up to the day, years later, his kidney finally rejected. We came to see him one last time in the hospital, and he still remembered our birthdays, remembered the point cards he hated but was addicted to, remembered the group home staff by name who worked with him. He always fought the system, except for putting on his deodorant. He'd make that methodical count to 12. I make every morning of my life. And let me see. I'd like to finish with a couple poems about my parents. The first one is entitled Softly Sings the Donkey. It's about being with my mom when she was passing away in the nursing home. And the title's from a little kid's rhyme that my folks used to sing to us when we fall down and hurt ourselves when we were going to sleep. You know, they wanted to lullaby us to sleep. So with your indulgence, I'll sing it to you just so you know what we listen to. Softly sings the donkey on his way to hay. Someone must go with him or he'll run away. Ki-ay, 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 ki-o. Someone must go with him or he'll run away. Softly sings the donkey. Bitter as she had become in life the last years, like the crust of earth that bubbles up in the desert from too little rain, too little life. She outdid me at the last when I came to her, where she lay dying, where she knew she lay dying, but replied to me, "I know you do, honey," when I told her for the last time that I loved her. When all I had done for all of my life had been to be arrogant and hurtful and full of myself, so that the last moment together, the day before she died, she could be open like a flower and full of all the love she never knew how quite to say, until it was somehow too late for me to have it make any difference except in how I would carry my guilt with me as long as I carried anything, which was not her intent at all. O suffering woman who lived a life secret enough you took it to the grave, who did not ever tell what had made you so sad, so angry all those years. For a long time, I thought you hated God, and maybe you always did secretly. That only will the nursing staff know and not tell to those you bred and raised and called your own. For your daughters, you made it a hell on earth, they tell me. And for most of them, the wounds will never heal. But for the boys, your lovely boys, you kept your secret love, your secret hate, for all the world bequeathed you. Oh, Mom, you went out naked like all the rest. Your mind shot. All those beautiful memories blasted down one by one like victims of a mass murderer. And numberless as the best, the bad memories too, crowding their way to the front to be counted amongst all the rest. And worst of all, your children all grown like phantoms at your bed, where for the last years you did not know who you were, did not know where we had gone, did not know what had become of your life, and yet you knew us all, each one, when you were dying and we came to you. Now you are gone, and it seems as if all the world is dying too, slowly, as though it will go away species by species, like your mind did, like our lives did. First there was the Depression years, and those you remembered, but all the rest slowly flaked away like the pieces of magic mica we found in the Black Hills when you took all of us there for vacations you could not remember the day you died. Or maybe you did. That was another thing I forgot to ask. I forgot to ask everything. I didn't know you were dying, and so took off with Bree back to Omaha. But Denisoy, the one you hurt the most, stayed there with you and held your hand and sang you the old songs, sang you off into the night, on your way to hay, for someone had to go with you or you'd run away. Can't read my writing here. This poem is about when my parents came to visit one time. They used to always stay with us until they later figured out it's better to not stay with us and get a motel, so it makes it a lot easier. And that's actually in a poem, and I wouldn't have to even actually say that. So My father and mother come to visit. This was before they learned it was better to get a motel. Makes it easier on everyone. But then we'd go get them at the motel and find my mother sitting on the bed as though they just had a scene. In her hat and coat, ready to go. And Dad still in the bathroom in his underwear with shaving cream and little flecks beneath his ears. Or maybe a tiny square of toilet paper on his chin with a red spot soaked through. They didn't come to visit often. Dad hated to travel. But I remember them sleeping in our bed. Debbie and I going in and out of the bedroom, trying to be quiet and get ready for work while they slept. Them not a whole lot older than I am right now. Mom up to use the bathroom. Dad there in bed in the fetal position. I don't know what I felt seeing my dad there sleeping, curled up like a child. He seemed so small. It took my breath away from me for a moment. He still had almost 20 years to live, but neither of us knew that. We'd never really been friends. He didn't know how to treat a young son, and now it seemed I was suddenly older. Not just older with self-knowledge, but older than my own pop. What are you supposed to think when your life rotates 180 degrees when you look in on your sleeping father? Again, thanks to you all for coming out to hear these poems. And the last poem I'm going to read is a really long one, so fasten your seatbelts and get your pillows out or whatever. This poem is entitled Nope, and that was the last word my dad said as he was dying. We were all standing around talking at the foot of his bed. And I said, hey, wait a minute, you guys. You know, they say that the last thing that, the last sense that goes is your hearing. And don't you think we should find out if Dad can actually hear? We were talking about funeral arrangements and stuff. So I said, hey, Dad, can you hear us? And he said, nope. So, and then that was it, because that's the way he always told jokes. He never, if he didn't figure it out, too bad. So, nope. Driving to Alliance in summer, bugs start to hit your windshield more and more as you go west, past the 100th meridian, the imaginary line on the map, west of which you're in what the white man called the Great American Desert, not knowing it's just the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains, the high plains where years after they misnamed it, but not too many, my father was born. Most of the way there, I sighted through the splattered wings of a butterfly, jewels of pink, green, blue, cells of its wings. Coming into town at sunset, looking through a tiny stained glass window, I somehow thought I'd keep forever. But heavy rain and the wipers the day after Dad died, and the jeweled window was gone. My father's last night on earth, we didn't know it was his last night. I want to write about that night, about my pop, about the last night we were with him when he was alive. But I'm torn between wanting to keep that night for myself and the desire or need to write about it. I have to question my motives for writing about the last night I spent with my father when he was still alive. But still, I think that I must write. Alive, just barely, though he didn't realize that. His kids gathered around his bedside to be with him, to help ease his time going out. What business is it of yours? Why should I write that? The most pitiful and sorrowful moments of my life. What do I get out of that? Or what do you get out of it? Do I get to make myself feel or think that I am a greater sufferer than you are? My listener, my reader? I know you've all done this, stood at somebody's bedside. So what makes me think that what I might write about my last few hours with my father is any more significant or noteworthy than your own? I don't. Excuse me. I have chronic bronchitis. So. I don't. But to write about it. I remember my father. I want to tell you this because he was a good man and a gentleman in a world of angry and violent men. And he was an angry man. He was a violent man. And I don't know what went on inside of his head, just as none of us can know what goes on in anyone's head. I don't know what he thought. I don't know what tormented him. I don't know what he thought he had missed out on in his life. I don't know what were his secret sorrows and shames. I don't know how he hid what he hid from view. I don't know what he hid from view. I don't know what he was like around others when I wasn't there. He tried to teach me how to cast black fishing line onto the water of a sandhills lake more patiently than anyone could deserve. Helped me untangle the immense snarls on the open-faced reel. Helped me again, then helped me again. 2 to 5 other children at the same time, depending upon who wanted to go fishing, to stand our silent vigils on the banks of Fry Lake. We fished for bullhead, ugly little cousins of catfish we tried to snag with double-set hooks, lead weights, big red and white bobbers. Unless you chose tight line, no bobber, just a cast out, your pole jammed into the hole you made in the sand. Rod straight up in the air to wait for that electric strike. Then reel in the bullheads after a cursory fight. Slimy fish with barbs and whiskers. We learned how to hold right from Dad, or have our small palms slashed open. I always lamented my father taught me nothing. Nothing like movie dads and TV dads, book dads and poem dads who whisper wise, shimmering things. He never once stared off into any sunset to intone something I would always remember about life into the air between us. He did tell me this: when I'm cranking a tractor over, to not wrap my thumb around the crank. If the engine kicked back, it would break my thumb off. When I was a young man, after a bad day at school, he told me this: when he was a young man, he never felt like he could go to a dance without liquid courage. I realized then he was liquored up when he met Mom. He told me this: always keep the muzzle of my shotgun pointing up or down. Keep my chamber open if we're at the end of a field. Never keep a loaded gun in the car out road hunting. To lay down my gun on the ground to cross a fence. But that's about all he told me I can remember. No philosophy, no meditative nuggets. He told me, keep the inside of the front tire of the tractor against the furrow. That's what he told me. That's what there was to pulling a plow. He never taught me anything about life, in quotes. Once he told me he dug potatoes as a boy for 50 cents a day. The night we got the news about my older brother, all my aunts and uncles around the kitchen table, he said he always knew something bad was going to happen. That was his philosophy. He stood on the landing between first and second floor of St. Joseph's Hospital, the whole family on the way up to a memorial mass at the chapel with Monsignor Keller. Stood there to cry, his moment of weakness, his one moment of grief. Then we went on. I think about him in the bus on the way home from work. Think about him in church when I see an old man who reminds me of him. Think about him when I interview any old man in his home. Think about him when I see an old man from behind with a crew cut and saggy skin on his head. Think about him when I see an old fellow with big ears. Think about him when I say something and my wife says, "You sounded just like your father." Think about him in church when they pray for the dead. Think about him when I play with a cat because he loved cats when he was a lonely old man. He didn't when he was younger, was cruel to them, kicked them when I was a boy. Think about him whenever I see a pheasant. Think about him whenever I talk about race relations, how he told me he could not help himself, that he was prejudiced. Think about him when I think about the Vietnam years. Think how he turned against the war when everybody else in our redneck town was for it. Think about him in his Pall Malls when I think of smoking a Camel, his secret stash down in the basement. Think about him when I think of farming. I'm 12, him standing on the platform while he taught me how to run the tractor. Think about him when I'm not thinking about him. Think about the last thing he said, his one-word joke. Think about him when I say nope or yep. Think about the smell of his farts, how I wandered into them Saturday afternoons, right by the piano. He'd plant them somewhere far away from everyone else because he was too polite to do that even around his own little kids. Think of him sitting in the red overstuffed chair I loved, smoking a cigarette and reading Look or Life. Think of him sitting at the kitchen table with the radio tuned into the Cornhuskers, after watching him eat a can of sardines on a sandwich slathered with mustard. Think of him saying the word slathered. Think about the one time he hit me after I broke my little sister's tooth. Think how he squirmed in an agony of anxiety that last night until we pumped him full of morphine. Think about his flash of anger when I joked about his belly in the nursing home a couple weeks before he was to die. I don't know how it came to be that I could ignore him all his life, and when he is dead, practically an old man myself, hair going, liver spots all over my hands, mustache white, dead for 5 years, I have still not typed up the long poem I wrote about the night he died. How a house burned down that night. The smoke came in the window. How cool was the breeze, the sound of the rail cars in the yards, coupling and uncoupling. How his cat, Tom Kosmicki, an old stray he brought into the house, sat on the end of his bed, stayed awake all night, watched him, refused to get off the bed, refused to leave. I don't know how it came to be. I would think about him all the time, especially since I was closer to my mother, though we had a stormy relationship, marred by her going out of control when she disciplined me, marred by me turning into a raving maniac when I was a little boy, terrible tantrums, saying awful, hurtful things. She thought she had to control. Dad distanced or gone all those times, never around the house when Mom and I had our big screamers. She beating me relentlessly with a belt, out of control, young sisters cringing in the corners. Them arguing over the style of discipline, type of punishment, over the fact she had to be the bad guy. He, always away farming, got to be the good guy, the one who was gentler. She had to be the punisher. Him blaming her for my behavior, her overreaction, her need to control. He wanted to give free rein. She and I fought. They argued continually. He blamed her for my behavior when it was nobody's fault. It was family dynamics. A baby girl came along after I'd been king 4 years. Attention suddenly gone. So why do I think of him so much when Mom and I are bonded by our fierce fights? In 2 days, we went through the house. Boxes of pictures, boxes of shoes and boots, life accumulation of tools, shotguns, rifles, table saws, workbenches, odds and ends, all in their places. We had to go through in 2 days in a fury of forgetting all of it. Every nail we found in the sawdust under the workbench reminded us of him. Every grow light, every worn out Red Wing boot, every block of styrofoam saved to use for insulation, every piece of duct tape, every light taped to a joist, even the boxes all the stuff was stored in his hand, save or kitchen. Intimate hammers, lovely chisels, cherished screwdrivers, each tool used by him, held by him, yellow paint on a hammer handle I recognized spilling. He sweat, wiped his brow, got that onto the crosscut saw handle, the yellow ball of chalk twine, the tape measure in its silver case, silver lawnmower handle, sacred awl punching holes in leather, blessed rasp smoothing out a corner, the intricate holy miter box. And we gave it all away, every bit of his workshop, except the token piece here and there of this and that, some trivial screwdriver or adze, something we watched him, every one of us, use to hammer into being, carve into shape, chisel to fit, shape or cut or smooth. We held the other end of it. Then we couldn't hold it any longer. He knew it, so he stopped. He put his work down. He was finished. While we still hold the other end of a 2x4 he cut to frame in a hole we can't find to patch. Filled it up with 3x5 card with Monsignor Manning's signature stating the date of their marriage at Holy Rosary, 1941. DD 214 from 45 with the one word on what career he planned to follow after discharge, veterinarian, dream unfulfilled. Photos from 1920 of a boy in shorts with a page boy haircut, the boy's dog Pooey pulling him in his wagon. Think of him when I say Pooey. Photo of the brothers, 1925, 5 of them, skinny as rails. My pop, a little boy, on the porch with my grandparents. Uncle Jeep, not born yet. All dead now, all the old farmers. Thinking of them, how my sister, a registered nurse, removed the catheter when he died, the last tether holding him to earth. Thank you. Are we supposed to do a Q&A? Did I leave any questions unanswered? There's a poem in there called Science, I think, where I was just kind of noodling around and writing down some, Science on page 47, and I was kind of noodling around writing down some ideas, trying to get a poem going, and I had been reading Scientific American, and there's a lot of little short articles in there. They're easy for anybody to understand. Some of those articles are unbelievably difficult, but and there was one about how those huge thunderstorms we get create tremendous amounts of, I think, microwave energy or something that goes out to the universe and, forever and ever. And then another little short article said that there was a recent scientific study that showed that sheep could not only recognize their own faces, but they could recognize human beings' faces. So I was looking for a weird title, so I used that. And actually, I've thought about that ever since I read that, how the sheep are probably looking at us, no, Greg, don't kill me, as you're dragging them off to the slaughterhouse, So.
What's your writing process? I mean, how do you start?
Sometimes something will happen during the day that kind of triggers my thinking about, like the poem about going outside and getting rained on, and that always reminds me of that walking by the lake at Great Lakes. For some reason, that's a real iconic moment for me. I don't know if iconic's the right word, but you know, and so I just sat down and started. What I try to do is get the pen moving and see where it takes me, and generally speaking, that's what I do. I just I will start writing and see what happens. You know, doesn't have to be much that happened during the day, and or sometimes I'll think of something from my past. There's a lot of stuff back there, so we all have a lot of stuff back there in the past.
Do you have any good pointers or writing exercises in the writer's block?
Well, I read an article about that one time that said that writer's block is kind of based on, I don't know if this is true or not, on thinking that you've become such a good writer that you couldn't possibly write something as good as you wrote before, you know, and so you start becoming negative about how you write, and the censors start working, and so then you suddenly are blocked. And William Stafford, the famous American poet, said that if you find you can't write a poem, Neil probably knows the quote, just lower your standards and start writing, because he said something along the lines of, if you can't write. Do you know that quote, Neil?
Lower your standards.
Yeah, lower your standards. So get something started and just see where it goes. And I kind of think that writer's block is just, for me, it used to be when I was a young writer, it was I think it was a way for me to avoid actually doing the work of writing, because it's pretty hard work writing, you know. So I could go around and say, yeah, I'm blocked, man, it's really terrible. And people say, yeah, well, how's your writing going? Oh, I'm blocked, it's fucking horrible, you know. But I think it's just a way of avoiding the actual work. It's tough. I try to, when I'm in my, when I'm being my best self as a writer, I try to write something every day. Just get something on the page, and then I go back to it a month later, 6 months later or something, and read through my notebooks, and you'd be surprised at how brilliant you were 6 months before, you know. Because most of the times when I write stuff, I think, God, that's really stupid, you know, and I'll quit right in the middle of it, and usually that's the poem telling me that's where I'm supposed to quit, and then you know, I come back to it later, and maybe, I don't know if it's the distance of being away from it, and you're not censoring yourself or something, but I think the message is just write something every day if you can.
Have you always enjoyed writing?
When I was in high school, I wrote a little bit, and I got some really good strokes from some of the people in one of my classes. I wrote this little poem, and my cousin saw it, and she thought it was really funny, and then they ended up publishing the school newspaper or something. So, and then, but I didn't really do any writing until when I was in the Navy. I was kind of real lonely and distraught half the time, and so I just started, I guess, like journaling or trying to write things in a notebook, and So I don't know if it actually started out being that I enjoyed it. It was more like a way to try and figure out what was going on. And I believe probably the reason that I became a writer was because of my brother having gotten killed, and it took me about 10 years or so after he was killed to start writing poems about that, and I think that's probably why I've continued writing, because I just got in the habit of it after that. So.
What made you want to become a social worker?
It's a long story. I've never planned out anything in my life, and I originally, when I went to university, I got a master's degree in English with a creative thesis, and then I couldn't get a job in it, and so I ended up doing a whole series of, dumb jobs, and had a young family to support, and some years later, after I'd worked as an old home bread man for a couple of years, and I'd done all kinds of dumb stuff, and got a job working for UPS in Alliance, and I did that for just under 7 years, and it was driving me insane. I wrote a book about it, and finally I just decided that I was tired of. We were taking a Bible study class in our church, and I actually started believing the things we're reading, and decided that I didn't want to spend my whole life trying to get and spend and being focused on having material possessions, and which was probably a good excuse for me to quit my job at UPS, which I hated. It was good money, and so I just up and quit one day and started looking for work in the social work field, and got a job working at a little company in Omaha, living in a group home, and my wife had to give up her teaching job in Alliance that she had struggled for years to get, and had just been teaching for 2 years in Alliance, and so everybody kind of hated me for a while, but that's how I got into doing social work. And then I through that got a job working at a community mental health organization in Omaha, and then got a job at the state of Nebraska doing a lot of boring stuff that state of Nebraska workers do with social work. And now I go out and investigate allegations of abuse and neglect of vulnerable adults. So that's interesting stuff.
Yeah, my dad is in that field, so that's.
Oh, really?
That's kind of
Yeah. Yeah, it was just accidental. We were at a training one time in Kearney, and there was a whole room full of Department of Health and Human Services social worker people, like 200 of us, and the presenter asked a question: how many people here in this room expected to still be working at this job or to be in social services for more than like 5 years when they started out, and there wasn't a person raise their hand? Everybody else thought they'd be doing something else. So it just happens. It's interesting work, though. Is that it? Well, thank you all for coming out and listening to me read my poems, and thanks for your questions. They were good ones. So. And thanks, Bonnie, for having me here.
You're welcome.